There are a variety of Unix shells to choose from. Usually the one that you choose is based on personal preference, although it could be dictated to you by your system administrator. There is a variety of them because they each offer different features, benefits, and compatibility. Let's have a look at them now. Okay, the original and most widely supported shell is called the Bourne shell, after its creator, a Mr. Bourne. I'm not sure what the SR stands for. It is the original, and these days it is considered the most basic of shells. However, it is incredibly popular. It needs to be stressed that a great proportion of users around the world that are using the Unix shell are using the Bourne shell, and an incredible majority, something like 95% of shell scripts are written using the Bourne shell. Its program file name is sh. If you don't know what that means, you will a little later on. Now, the Bourne shell was the original, and it was seen to be quite rudimentary. It did not offer some features that users wanted. So, rather than modify the existing Bourne shell, which would then render it incompatible with all other Bourne shells in all the other versions of Unix, what people did is, instead of modifying the existing shell, they created a second shell, which was essentially the original shell with some features added. So it is, if you like, a superset of the Bourne shell. There's a few of those to choose from. The most popular, or one of the most popular, is the Korn shell. Just coincidentally happens to rhyme with Bourne shell. The fellow's name was David Korn, who created that, and the file name is KSH, and that was developed originally by AT&T. So if you wanted it on your system, you actually had to pay a source code license to AT&T for the privilege. There was obviously great for a free version of the Korn shell that offered the same sort of features as the Korn shell, or perhaps even improved features over the Korn shell, but was indeed entirely free. And so they created another Bourne derivative shell called the Bourne Again shell. A little cleverness on behalf of these Unix boffins in the naming department. Its file name is BASH, or bash, and it offers a great deal of features that are used primarily by users of Unix who are running Unix on a PC. In other words, we're talking about versions of Unix like Linux. Linux is free, the bash is also free, and so you find that users of the Linux system almost exclusively use bash for their interactive shell usage. And there are many more, like the Z shell, or the Z shell if you're North American. And there are many more. Now, by way of a little aside, it's important to mention that it is possible to write scripts using the Bourne shell program as an interpreter of those scripts. And if you write such a script, it is known as a shell script for obvious reasons. Now, the fact that this is possible means that some people think, including myself, think of the Bourne shell as its own programming language. The Bourne shell is not just an interactive shell for people to use to start programs, it is also a programming language, or a scripting language to be precise. There are many other scripting languages in the world, and there are even scripting languages in the world that have relation to shells. In the DOS world, you'll find that the command.com shell is also a scripting language. It allows the user files using that particular language. Batch files are extremely rudimentary in comparison Bourne shell scripts. Also, it should be mentioned that all Bourne-compatible shells, in other words, bash and the Korn shell and so forth, all share the same programming language, and that is indeed why they're called Bourne-compatible shells. Shell scripts are extremely widely used in the computing world. A lot of Unix system administration is done using the shell scripts, specifically Bourne shell scripts, and a lot of CGI back-end processing on the internet is also done via shell scripts, though not as much as is done by using things like Perl scripts. Nevertheless, some Bourne shell scripts exist, quite a great deal in fact, that are used in CGI programming, and the shell scripts that are used are almost always Bourne shell scripts. And again, as I mentioned before, the Virtual Training Company is offering a training course on Unix shell scripting, and that is indeed related to Bourne-compatible shells. Now, the term Bourne-compatible shells implies that there are shells out there in the Unix world that are not Bourne-compatible, and that is true. Some people do not like the shell programming language. Sorry, I should say some people do not like the Bourne shell programming language. They would like it to have more features in it. They'd like it to be more powerful. Now, these people who want this are typically programmers themselves, and if they're programmers in the Unix world, they're probably C programmers. So another shell was developed. It's not a derivative of the Bourne shell, but it's similar to the Bourne shell. The main difference is that the language, the scripting language, the interpreted scripting language, is a different language, and it's more closely related to the powerful C programming language. And for this reason the shell was called the C shell. Another little Unix witticism there. The file name for that particular program is CSH. Now, the CSH, or the C shell, was the original shell of that particular programming language. That in turn was seen to be rudimentary and evolved its own family of C-compatible shells, and TCSH is probably the most popular of those. So how do these two families of shell relate to each other? Well, from a programming standpoint, they don't really. A C shell script scripts in the Bourne shell as an interpreter, and vice versa. However, if you don't want to use them from a programming standpoint, if you just want to use them on an interactive basis to start other programs, then they behave very, very similarly, almost the same. They have a couple of certain features, such as the command history that they implement slightly differently, but other than that, they're virtually the same.